Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Britain will take in more unaccompanied child refugees who fled the war in Syria to Europe, David Cameron promised today, trying to head off a potentially damaging backbench rebellion. However, the Prime Minister did not commit to a specific number. MPs had been pressing for 3,000 children to be allowed in. The government insists it doesn't want to create an incentive for people traffickers. But is this the beginning of a U-turn? Here's our senior Home Affairs correspondent, Simon Israel.
Grand response to Earl Baldwin's appeal for funds.
Today saw the intervention of the Kinder transport refugees who escaped the Holocaust as children nearly 80 years ago. In the late 1930s, the UK took in 10,000 mainly Jewish children from Germany, Austria and Czechoslovakia. In a letter to David Cameron, the survivors said the echoes of the past still haunt them, and they urged him to reconsider turning the UK's back on today's child refugees wandering through Europe. At Prime Minister's question time, he rejected the Kinder transport comparison, but grudgingly conceded he'd lost the argument.
We're going to go round the local authorities and see what more we can do, but let's stick to the principle that we should not be taking new arrivals to Europe.
Unbowed by last week's Commons defeat on his call to accept more, Lord Dubs, himself a Kinder transport evacuee, was preparing to have another go. Removing specific targets would have brought more Tories on board an almost certain defeat for the government.
What it establishes is the principle the government have fought up to now, and the principle is we take unaccompanied child refugees from Europe. The government had set its face against that, and that was the big difference in today's announcement. Secondly, there's going to be a process where the government will talk to local authorities, will work with them to find foster parents, suitable foster parents, to provide decent homes for these young people.
Details are sketchy. There's no mention of numbers, but I understand the children from Europe will be in addition to the 3,000 the government has agreed to take in from the refugee camps in the Middle East. There are no deadlines either. But today David Cameron has in effect admitted he's lost the political argument. And to those who believe the UK still isn't doing enough, that's what counts. This is not just about those who have made it to camps in Europe, like Calais. In fact, it might be argued they are the more fortunate among an estimated 90,000 lone children who've asked for asylum in Europe in the last year.
10,000 of them have completely disappeared. The ones who haven't disappeared are left sleeping in train stations, in parks, on pavements, in petrol station forecourts. They're incredibly vulnerable to sexual exploitation, to abuse, to trafficking, to being pulled into the drugs trade or worse. So that's why we fought so hard for this to happen today.
But the government has drawn at least one line in the sand. Downing Street said the focus would be on children registered in Greece, Italy and France before the EU signed a deal with Turkey in March to stop the flow of refugees into Europe. It said the government would work with local authorities to determine numbers, but councils themselves have raised the issue of long-term funding and the need for a national dispersal system.
Simon Israel. We're joined here by Hella Pick, who was herself a refugee in 1939, leaving Austria on the Kinder transport trains, and from Westminster by Conservative MP Sir Edward Lee, who thinks that we should not be taking in unaccompanied child refugees who've managed to reach Europe. Hella Pick, and you were a celebrated diplomatic correspondent, so you know your Europe, but just casting your mind back to the Kinder transport, do you see a parallel with Britain's reception of the Kinder children, like yourself at 7, and these children?
Well, there's no direct comparison with the condition in which the children are today and the refugee children before the war. But at the same time, what has to be similar is the way in which they are received and dealt with, whether it's in Britain or, of course, also in France, where when one thinks of the camps in Dunkirk and Calais, the French, as well as Britain, ought to be doing something for these children.
But one of the things which, of course, people are concerned about is whether local authorities can... That's rather what the Prime Minister seems to suggest. He would check with them whether they could handle a whole lot of children.
Look, I think this is pursuing a false hare, because really, when you think about it, when I reflect on what happened to the refugee children, the Kindertransport children, they were all taken in by the Quakers, by members of the Jewish community. They went into individual homes. And I think what needs to be done, and that would be much easier to absorb far more than 3,000 children, would be for religious organizations, including the Muslim organizations, to get together, because there are endless people in this country who are willing to take these children. And of course, some of them could be absorbed also into the Islamic communities in Britain.
Well, now, Sir Edward Lee, I mean, do you see a parallel with the Kindertransport? We were open-armed in receiving those, and indeed, the many, many families took them in. Why not the same parallel today?
Well, I think there's no parallel with the Kindertransport, because the whole point of the Kindertransport is that we were not taking children from France, we were taking them directly from Nazi Germany, where they were the subject of genocidal hatred. And the policy of the government has been to concentrate on pouring resources into Syria. We are the most generous European donor, and taking children directly from Syria, where they are subject to genocide. So I see no comparison to the Kindertransport.
So your Prime Minister is dead wrong?
No, he's not wrong at all. What he's actually saying today is that he's going to hold the line on not taking any people under the age of 18. And one must bear in mind that a very large percentage of these, quote, children are in fact 16-year-old people at or near military age or even older. He's drawn the line that we're not going to take any new arrivals in Europe, because the whole point of our policy the whole point of our policy is that if you let in vast numbers of, quote, children who are already here in Europe in a safe, non-genocidal environment, you are simply encouraging people traffickers, and we're going to hold the line on that.
Well, I mean, let's just for a moment just gather a thought of who these children are. We've seen a lot of them, and some of them are 6, 7, 8, 10 years old. Of course, a lot of them are older than that. But what about the ones that are much younger than that? Now, the Prime Minister said earlier this week we would not be taking any of these 3,000 children out of Europe. You're saying there's been no change?
What the Prime Minister is saying is that he's holding the line on not taking any new arrivals, so there will be no draw factor. And by the way, he's not just going to take children. Of course, we've got to be humane. If there's a genuine case of a child who really is 8 or 9 years old and, for instance, has relations here, of course, the government will be prepared to take them in, and always has been prepared to take them in. But the Prime Minister has always been very clear today that we're going to consult with local authorities, because if you're right that we are talking about children, there are safeguarding issues, there are resource issues. The government is simply not going to take large quantities of, quote, children from Europe where they're already in a safe environment. Many of these 16-year-olds, of course, have torn up their passports deliberately. They could claim asylum. They are already in a safe place. So what we may be seeing here emerging is a gentle and safe and correct compromise, but we're going to hold the line. We are not going to take vast numbers of young people from Europe. We are going to go on taking people directly from Syria.
Let's let Hella Pick respond to that.
No, I mean, I'm sorry. I think some of your arguments, if you forgive me, really do seem ludicrous to me. The children we're talking about, amongst others, are the children we've seen on our cameras and where people have visited them after in the camps. They are not in a comfortable situation. They're in a dreadful situation, and they are exposed to every conceivable danger. And I think there's a very strong case to take them. We're not talking about 16-year-olds. Most of these children are much, much younger. And I think we have to consider their welfare. And, you know, the idea that parents are sending single children to Europe just in order somehow to get themselves into Europe, I think, you know, this is also far-fetched. And if I may go back again to this notion of going to local authorities, it doesn't have to be a matter of burdening local authorities. There are endless families in this country, I'm convinced, and I mean, everybody's aware of the offers that are coming in, who are willing willing to take these children and look after them and take care of them.
Sir Edward?
Well, there are local authorities who feel they have the resources to look after genuine children. If there are families who want to look after these children, then I agree, why not can be open-minded
There
about
are
it.
families in your constituency, Sir Edward, who want to take Syrian refugees.
Oh, yeah, but I've got to also speak for what I consider to be the silent majority. We are the #1 location for migration. We all know that once Angela Merkel opened the floodgates, we just had streams of people. We had appalling people trafficking. And so the policy of the government, of our British government, absolutely correct to be the #1 donor into Syria and to try and keep people in Syria and to take some genuinely vulnerable families from Syria. Now we're going one step further now. We'll work with local authorities. If there are genuine children in need, we'll take them, but we'll do it within our resources.
Sir Edward, that makes it clear. There has been a U-turn. We're going to take children. Last week we weren't. So that seems to be a wonderful development. Thank you very much for joining us. Hella Pick too.